Welcome to Cycling While Black. I'm Sarai Exil. My pronouns are she, her. I'm Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategy here at Dick's Sporting Goods. And I'm really lucky to work alongside the team at Public Lands in their mission to get more people outdoors. So today we are here to chat about cycling. The bicycle can be a tool for accessing the outdoors and creating an inclusive community, yet cycling culture and bike infrastructure has historical and structural inequities. To help us grow and learn and really understand how we all can make a difference, we've invited 5 Black community leaders using the bicycle as a way to further advocacy, equity, and inclusion. They'll be discussing Black history in cycling, both barriers and trailblazers, sharing their own stories on the bike and offering takeaways of how we all can call in the cycling community to be more inclusive. So let's get started with introductions, my friends. All right, and we'll start with Angelo.
I'm an athlete. I race downhill mountain bikes. I'm a professional mountain biking instructor. I instruct little kids to grown-ups. I've been riding bikes for about 8 years now and racing 8 years. I hopped right into racing, and that's where like progression came from. And the love for the sport has like grown each year.
Thank you. We'll pass it to Bertie.
I am the founder and co-lead of Black Girls Do Bike Columbus. Of course, we were founded in Pittsburgh by Monica Garrison. I started our chapter in 2014. By day, I'm an oncology nurse, and I've been cycling actually all my life, but not as seriously as until 2014, when a stress fracture due to arthritis and knee replacement caused me to really focus more on cycling. And since then, I probably put more miles on my bike than I have my entire life. So it's a passion for me. It's a passion for me to be in this community of my cycling colleagues.
Thank you, Bertie. I'll pass it to Devin.
I run a community group in Atlanta known as Radical Adventure Riders. We're the Atlanta chapter of that group, and our aim is to broaden the conversation around racial equity and gender diversity in the cycling space in the greater outdoors. Through this group, we host monthly rides, monthly overnights. We have a gear library, an open shop space, and just do a lot of gathering for folks who are cis women, trans folks, and non-binary folks in the cycling space. And I'd like to think that I'm adding meaningful conversation to the cycling world and kind of, outdoor world in general, and really helping to shift the conversation of how folks are seeing Black people, queer folks, and other folks of color in the outdoors.
Thanks, Devin. Shequaya.
I'm located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am the president of Pittsburgh Major Taylor Cycling Club, also a member of the Black Foxes. I'm also on the board of Bike Pittsburgh, an advocacy organization here in Pittsburgh. I'm also on the board of Pittsburgh Youth Leadership, which is a community group, a nonprofit organization that supports kids biking, using that as a vehicle to go across the country, all different trips. And I'm also a member of the Black Girls Do Bike here in Pittsburgh, as well as a league certified instructor. And I also race bikes. I'm on Pittsburgh Babes Bikes cycling team. So I do kind of a lot of things bike oriented. And by actual profession, I'm a director of operations at Grounded Strategies. And just kind of got into cycling initially from commuting and eventually grew from there. And I try to contribute back to my community by volunteerism, give it back, teaching, and spreading the word about Black people riding bikes and Black women and Black queer women. And that's how I identify. So, yeah.
Thank you. Talib.
I live in Austin, Texas. And I'm the founder of an organization called Black History Bike Ride. Our mission is to get people out on their bikes and to visit different historical sites in Austin and in other cities. I'm looking at everyone on this call. Basically, to get out, it's a mixture of get on your damn bike, ride your damn bike, and share Black stories. We're able to really create some really meaningful experiences when we visit different places where different important experiences and lived experiences occurred in the Black community. And I think connecting them all together by bike is one of the most beautiful and meaningful ways to do that. I got started in cycling pretty young. I was a latchkey kid, only child, rode my bike around all the time to get to my friends' houses, and that turned into me racing at a pretty young age. And yeah, ever since then, I've just had a lifelong love of cycling.
I love it. Thank you. I'm curious. I know Shequaya, Talib, you just shared kind of how you got started in cycling. I'm interested to hear from Devin, then maybe Angelo, and then Bertie, how you got started in cycling. Where did it begin? What did the journey look like for you?
Yeah, I can go first. So I actually started cycling when I lived in DC as a bike commuter for my second year of AmeriCorps. And really, I just needed to get around. My brother was a bike commuter in Chicago and building single speed bikes. So I had him build me one, brought it back to DC and started riding it. And then moved to Atlanta in 2015. And a few years later, just kind of on the cusp of a breakup, was really craving community. And I was like, car free. I'd been car free for 5 years living in DC. Continue that here in Atlanta, which those days are gone, but they were lovely. And just like being able to connect with folks in Atlanta who were sort of just trying to also create welcoming spaces for folks on bike who were not cis white men. And so that sort of just skyrocketed my community work. And now it's my life's work. So it's been a good journey so far.
Thanks, Devin. Angelo.
All right. So I got started in 2015, and it was kind of one of those things where like I played AAA baseball for like a couple of years, and like I took a real serious injury to the right side of my face, completely crushed the right side of my face, had to get plastic surgery. And so I'm an architecture designer by day, and one of my coworkers, like he seen me in kind of a low, like a slump, right? And he was like, "Hey man, you want to take my bike out and just like ride?" We had a little mile gravel loop around our office, and he said, "Hey, you want to borrow my bike and just like pedal around for an hour, like just to like decompress?" I was like, and seriously, I looked him in his eyes and he was like, "Dude, what I look like riding a bike, right?" But I took him up on that offer, and like I got back into the office. I was like, "Hey, that was kind of relaxing." And he was just like, he invited me that following Friday with him and a group of guys. He's like, "Hey, don't worry about a bike, don't worry about a helmet, like just come and enjoy it." And I went out there. I crashed probably every 100 feet. It's probably one of the most technical parks here in Richmond, and I call that park my girlfriend to this day, because like we got this love-hate relationship. She taught me the way of mountain biking, and like she helped me progress in like skills, and like to this day, like he's still my mentor at work. And like to this day, when I go to work now, from coming back from like race trips, he always say, "Hey, no broken bones," or he always lets me in like that kind of way. He's like, "Hey, good luck this weekend, but we need you Tuesday." But yeah, so that was my intro into like mountain biking, and ever since then, it's been like no looking back.
Wow. I love that. And I think that I'm just connecting some dots here. Devin, just really seeking community, and from cycling, and then Angelo, I love this idea of it being relaxing and almost like just a pivot of how we're active outdoors. So thank you for that. And Bertie, would love to hear from you around how you got started.
So actually, I grew up in rural Northeast Ohio, and I tell people I'm a little bit older than my other panelists. So back in the day, we did not have any gaming systems. We had 3 TV channels. So you had to go outside or you would like be a vegetable. I actually and still it's sort of a dirt road where my family lives. And so I'm like, wow, I was an original gravel rider, because you really, country road is a mile long. So if you wanted to get anywhere, you rode on your bike. I did not. My mother bought us used bikes. My brother got on the bike, rode to the neighbors without ever even have been on a bike. I'm like, wait, he could do it, I'm going to do it. I got on my bike, rode to the neighbors, and we've been riding ever since. I always took a bike to college. When I got married and had a son, I would put my son on the back. We'd go up on the trails, and I would say it was 2014 when I sustained my injury to my knee. I found out about Black Girls Do Bike, and that's when I started the chapter in Columbus, because other than that, I would ride before just by myself, and then with this other cycling group. I brought my 10 closest friends. We've grown to over 800. We're actually starting our season in a couple weeks. We ride weekly. We ride in collaboration with other cycling groups, and I'm a major tailor also. I'm on the board of Yay Bikes. I'm also a part of Central Ohio Greenways and part of MORPC. So we are providing input into bike safety and bike lanes and bike traffic. And that, I never saw myself doing that. So I appreciate the everyday duties of leading bikes and helping members reach their goals, whether it's just to be casual rider or if they want to be long distance riders. Now, if they want to race, I have to refer them out. If they want to grab a bike, I have to refer them out. But the women that we ride with weekly, it's been inspirational and it warms my heart. And we truly have grown every year. So very exciting for us.
Thank you, Bertie. I think this kind of brings us into our next part of the dialogue. Last year we sat down with a few members of our community. Shequaya actually was on that panel as well, as we just talked about being Black in the outdoors. And, we had some startling statistics that we listened to. The first was that 2% of national park visitors are Black. And then I actually did a little bit of research before I came on and learned a little bit about cycling, the racing part of cycling. And, in the past 3 years, there's been, less than 1% representation in this sport for Black athletes, right? There's also just a little bit of this idea that perhaps, and I'm just going to speak from a personal note, like there's almost like, oh wow, like we're out there cycling. It's a little bit of a surprise for me in this moment as I sit here with the five of you. And so what I want to help us do as we move into this next part of the conversation, I want to maybe contextualize the conversation for folks, right? And really talk about some of the key moments in the outdoors and in cycling for Black Americans. Like what are some of the key moments that matter to today's climate for Black and African Americans in the outdoors, and even like what do we celebrate, right? And I'm gonna maybe pass it to Devin first to help us get grounded.
Yeah, so, key moments is interesting because I wonder too, like how much of this is just known, right? I think for me, the stories I'm familiar with are, the Buffalo Soldiers, 1866, the formerly enslaved Black serviceman that served on the front lines, commuted by bike. Kitty Knox, 1894, she was the first Black woman accepted into the League of American Wheelmen. I think lesser known, there's a group of 5 women who biked 250 miles from Harlem to DC to celebrate the love of the great outdoors, and so I think for me, celebrating is being able to talk about these previously buried stories, right? They're being uncovered. We're having a conversation like this. I think even pre-2020, this was pretty just not a thing that was happening. And I think I'm continually energized by folks, like Shequaya, for example, we're friends, who I see doing the work that they're doing in their communities and just being able to connect with Black folks who are looking out for one another and sharing resources and passing resources to community groups that need it, and continually highlighting these conversations, because I do think there's a number of stories that we still don't know about that haven't been recorded, right? As you know, histories of communities of color is more oral and it hasn't been as written down as much for many reasons, right? So I think just continuing to highlight these folks, learning about their stories, talking about it, sharing with others. And, I think in 20, 30, 50, 100 years, our stories may be out there and there'll be just more kind of adding to that. And I'm energized by that. And I think, we got to count these little things as wins because it's really important to keep these conversations happening because they will die if we don't do it. So.
Thank you, Devin. Shequaya, anything to add there?
Being the president of Pittsburgh Major Taylor, I think it's important to highlight, what he did, becoming the first African-American cycling world champion back in 1899 for the World Sprint Championship. So that was monumental for that time. And I believe he was also the second Black athlete to win a world championship in any sport during that time. And so that's like the origin story for how the club got started and just like why we decided to highlight his name, so his name isn't forgotten. And I think that's why a lot of clubs, continue to have these chapters called Major Taylor, whatever the city is. And a lot of those organizations tend to have a youth component, and that gives back. Like we have Major Force youth program here in Pittsburgh, and we provide bicycles to kids. So that's like a key piece in how we continue to do that work and spread that to the community, and so that name isn't forgotten.
Thank you, Shequaya. Talib.
I think one thing that I really I think of a lot is the fact that Nelson Vales was the first Black African-American cyclist to win a silver medal in 1984, and it kind of reminds me of how people, Black people have been involved in these, going back to Major Taylor and before, they've been involved in cycling in all of these pursuits and activities, I mean, since they've existed, but we still don't see, or we haven't seen that level of athleticism or them being allowed to participate fairly until, 1984 or until the modern era. And so I really think about how, we're coming up on 40 years of that. Had other Black individuals throughout history not been, held back, that, could have looked a lot different, So it inspires me, and I think it probably inspires other people on this call to just, know to get out there and have fun. And I'm a huge mountain biker. I love to be deep in the woods, spend a lot of time lost in the woods. When I see new people of color out in the woods having fun, coming back saying I had so much fun out in the woods, that brings me so much joy because in the historical context, the woods and wilderness, they really weren't safe spaces for people of color. And the fact that, in the modern era, they have to be equitable, they have to be free and open for all of us. When I hear about, new people that it's day 2 or week 2 on a mountain bike or on a gravel bike or on a road bike, and they're like, I had so much fun, that brings so much joy and so much happiness to me. So in terms of history, that's what I celebrate. I just love seeing people getting out, especially new riders.
Okay, so help me understand something, because I think you said something about 40 years. And so 40 years ago, can you help me understand what happened just one more time that essentially unlocked access to cycling or outdoors or whatnot? What can you remind me what it was again?
Well, what really unlocked it, I think in the 80s, cycling started to become really cool. Like you had the folks like Nelson Vales, but then he also has all the bike messengers in New York, Brooklyn, and the image of cycling became really cool,
I love that. That's awesome. Okay, thank you for helping me contextualize that a little bit more, because I'm new to the game, and I see Angelo is ready to jump in as well.
So I know all you guys come from cycling world, road cycling, cross country cycling. I just want to touch on the downhill and gravity portion of it. When I first got into the sport, especially downhill, I searched for a Black professional rider, and I could not find one, right? And so I searched again, and I found, I don't know if you guys know, but I found Elliot Jackson, and he's from California, right? And we had a national 2018 mountain bike nationals was held at Snowshoe, and I seen him, right? I'm like, oh my God, that's him right there. And so not to fanboy out, but this professional rider, right? And I see him, and he's at a restaurant, and we had this casual conversation, and we just talked. We didn't even talk bikes. We just talked because there was another Black guy on the mountain, right? And it was just one of those things, we kind of connected right then and there. And now he's got all these foundations and stuff like this. I don't know if you heard of Pro Cycling Foundation, but that's founded by him. And so I just really wanted to highlight him in this celebration that we're having right now.
I love this. Thank you. Bertie, I have you as well, and then I want to pivot just a little bit to just another question. So just want to see if you have something to add before we pivot a little bit.
And I do want to highlight, this Shequaya mentioned, Major Taylor. These men who started the chapter in Columbus, Ohio, are still riding, 79 and 80 years old, and they are not lollygagging. These men are still fiercely riding. They have really opened up and are truly bringing in many more young riders. And they also partner with a group called Remember Us Urban, well, it's going to be Remember Us Urban Legends, which is headed up by a man who teaches young men to ride safely in the streets of their neighborhoods. Because truly, and many people have mentioned this already, we have to bring others up and let children see that this is normal, and not just to ride to the neighbors, but you can ride the city. So Major Taylors are going strong, and they're bringing up new generations of Major Taylors.
Oh, I think what's also really incredible about what you just shared is this idea that this sport brings so much joy that you're doing it at any age, right? Like it's something that you carry with you throughout your lifetime, and something that you get so passionate about that you're passing it along to the next generation or to the people around you, your peers and whatnot. And I say this, I'm gonna ask this next question, kind of with this context of not everyone's family celebrated their participation in the outdoors, right? There might have been a few preconceived notions of what the outdoors were like for some of us when we were growing up. So I just want to ask this question, you know, what were the outdoors like for you when you were growing up? And like, how did your family feel about the outside or cycling in general? And I ask that just from coming from a perspective where my family didn't always feel like it was safe for me to be outside, and that there were a lot of rules and regulations, just even me just riding my bike in the cul-de-sac, right? So I'm not sure who I can go to first, but maybe I'll go to Shequaya first. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me growing up, riding bikes was pretty, my mom was open with it and fine, and we would just ride around the neighborhood. And like us going outside and enjoying the outdoors really looked like us going to like a nearby park. And so that's kind of how we engage with it. But it was more as I got an adult that they got more concerned. When as a kid, you just run amok, go ahead, come back when the street lights come on. But now as an adult, that's when they can start being more concerned for my safety. Like, oh, you sure you should be riding out there? You might get hit, you might do this. But then in turn, I think when my family saw me riding, even for leisure and commuting, even though they thought I was a little crazy for doing it, it made them be like better drivers and nicer to people on bikes as a result.
Thank you, Shequaya. I love that the impact of like your safety and the care for you as an individual has helped them, you know, make maybe safer decisions while driving to make sure that others are getting home as well. Devin or Angelo, any thoughts to add? I'll go Angelo, then Devin. Yeah.
So growing up, I grew up in probably one of the poorest housing projects here in Richmond. So it's one of those things where, like, if my mom wasn't outside sitting on the porch, we were not outside. I had no idea that we had these like class 5 like mountain biking trails around the city. Like, because like as a kid, like she was protecting us from like what she had to go through back then. So it's kind of like one of those things where like I didn't know like any of this existed until what, 2015. So in 2015, well, I'm 28 now. I was 28 then, and just finding this stuff out, finding these like trails and stuff like that. But as far as outdoors, like I did play sports and stuff like that, but it was just like you were the coach, I'm at practice. It's not no like you can go outside and just go run off with your friends. Nah, it was none of that. And then come around, like make it full circle. I started riding in 2015. I'm like, oh, dang, this trail been here all these years? Like, the river has been like this fun all these years? Like, so it's kind of like one of those things. Now it's like, I got 3 daughters, all right, and my baby boy on the way. And like, to be able to like take them down to the river now and like show them these trails, it's kind of like, that's that's pretty much like why we having this conversation right now.
I think you highlighted a few things that I don't think I thought about prior to this call. The first is that in team sports, team activity, you're kind of going to a location. It's very like guided, right? And then, you know, the outdoors is a lot of exploration, right? Like you find it because you're just curious. And it might be why Public Lands calls their customer explorers, you know, like, but it's true. Like you're curious about the world around you, you're engaging in it in some way. And that almost feels like endless. There's limited possibility. And, you know, as a kid, that can be really, I love the Shequaya run amok. You're gonna find it. You're gonna go figure it out. Because I think that's how I played when I was a kid too. And then as you get older, you recognize kind of the dangers of what could be. It's maybe because of the community that you grow up in, and really needing that safe place to play, but also just for like the reality of the world that we live in. So thank you for that, Angelo. Devin.
I was outside a lot because of sports, right? Like, I went to school where we had to do a certain sport or sports for a period of time. And I think my parents felt like sports were a way to kind of teach life skills and you could learn a lot, yada, yada, which I think is true in some ways. But now actually, I feel that my family and like both like immediate and beyond, like I'm the person that they ask about bike things and getting outside. They're like, oh, you're doing these activities. Looks really fun. Like, tell me about this. Or like, I discovered this trail. Did you know of this? And all of these things. And so like my sister has a bike. My mom lives with me now. So that's amazing. So she's riding a bike. I visited my dad a couple of years ago and he got on a bike for the first time in like 30 years. And so just being able to kind of bring that bike joy to my family, and just, you know, people ask me bike questions too family members, even when I don't know them, but just because I'm like the bike person. But I think they've resonated with that kind of bike joy and that experience in nature that I've had. And they're like, I see that joy in you. I want a piece of that. And this is really cool, right? And then if you ever talk to an adult, I feel like everyone has that story of like when they got on a bike as an adult, or their story of having a bike if they ever did, right? So I think that's been cool to kind of have those conversations. My mom is like, I remember riding bikes, but I never owned one. And now she's like wanting to do this with me all the time. So I think that there's sort of this connection between that childhood sort of time outside and kind of present day, being able to kind of bring those back together, which has been really exciting.
Thanks, Devin. Bertie, I'll go to you next.
Where I grew up in Northeast Ohio, you were either outside or you weren't doing anything. Population was 2,000, so we didn't have to really, and I say that includes the animals, we didn't have to worry about a lot of traffic. The next town was 6 miles. So if you're going to just go out on a bike ride, if you want to get anywhere, you were going on a trek as a kid, 6 miles, 13 miles. So that's just what we did. I am the only cyclist in my family. When they see me riding, they're like, what? You're going 100 miles? Who would do that? Who would do that on a bike? But they still do other outdoor activities.
Talib, what was growing up in the outdoors like for you, or how did your family feel about it?
My family was actually pretty supportive. I think, you know, like, I felt like the outdoors were just a huge, you know, place of adventure and, you know, a big playground for me growing up. I grew up south of Houston, Texas. Houston is a huge car culture, commuter culture place. It's very flat. People are driving their big trucks at like 80 miles an hour. So my mom was, you know, obviously concerned, you know, about that. But, you know, to me, because of that commuter culture, because so many people spend so much time inside and in their vehicles, it felt kind of rare and special to be the ones that were, even if we were out in our suburbs, like out, you know, in the drainage ditches and like exploring these, these gravel roads and kind of these back road trails, because no one else was doing that. Everyone was inside. So I think that curiosity and that adventure is something that really resonates for me from a really young age because of cycling.
I love this. I feel like you are all very curious people, and just the way that you're describing your love of the sport of cycling. And I'm really interested to kind of hear what your thoughts are now, just like thinking about cycling today and you know, where we are at today. It's kind of the things that I shared earlier around just, even from a racing perspective, having less than 1% of representation and that's across the world. And then as we're thinking about the future, just, like, I want to kind of ground us in like what's happening today in the world of cycling, and like what do we need to do to make cycling more accessible to more people? Because I'm hearing it from you all now. Like, I think one of the things I wrote down was hashtag bring that bike joy. I think that was from what Devin shared. So how do we do this? What does that look like? And I think I'm gonna go back to Talib.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that comes to my mind is access, and how we think of access not only to the outdoors but to cycling in general. I love cycling. I love spending my money on cycling. I recognize that some people, and many people who are just getting off, like they don't exactly have the money to invest in a nice bike that's going to create all these experiences. Like, you walk into a store and a helmet costs a lot of money. The right clothes, the right gear costs a lot of money. So thinking about how, people are able to access the right tools they need. They don't need the fanciest tools, but I think the industry as a whole doing more to recognizing that, if you give, a person a great intro into cycling, they can easily become lifelong cyclists. But if you walk into a store and you see a $4,000 price tag on a bike, you might say, like, that's not for me. And that's understandable.
I love that. And I think what I think is important, because I actually made this mistake. And I did something called Pelotonia in Columbus, Ohio. And it's an amazing ride that happens with this community in Columbus and across the country now, where you ride your bike 25, 50, 100, 150 miles. You raise money for cancer research. And that was my first cycling experience. And I purchased a really expensive bicycle, and I rode it 3 times. And it was great. I loved it until we got to these really big hills during the ride. And I think that there were a lot of things I learned about myself. I learned about the bike, and I learned how technical it can be, and like what could have been better for me. I bought a bike that was way too big for me also. Like, I think I needed a way small. There were a lot of things that I realized, like, wow, if I could have rented this, what a difference it could have made to actually get me into this space. And I want to cheers to Public Lands, because I know we have a renting program, but I want to pass it to Bertie, and then we'll go Angelo.
So now they have funders who want to fund teams, not 100%, but half. So it's providing more access to people, because we have people, instead of raising $2,000, we only have to raise $1,000. I have been riding that for like 9 or 10 years. I do not need matching because I'm an oncology nurse. People know what I do. I can share the positive stories, the benefits. So this year, our goal is to have 50 riders of color. Last year, we had about 25, previous years, like 5. It has truly grown for all of us to have this opportunity, and we're all going under one umbrella. And when I would have my Black Girls Do Bike jersey on, I had so many compliments, because it says, they're like, people are like, oh my God, I love your jersey. So they weren't like out here like, what, why are you riding? No, they were embracing us. We do have to share with people that you don't need a $10,000 bike. You don't need bike kits, but you're good. And that's what we need to continue to reinforce, so people don't feel less than because they're not having the fanciest bike, or that they got it off Facebook Marketplace. We want you to ride no matter what. And then one thing that we're doing as a community is we're offering, e-bikes have come in to play with the bike share, but we're actually working with the bike shops to offer discounted, very discounted, actually free, because it's going to be covered by grants for people who want a bike and especially want to use it for bike for transportation. So, and that people are not looking at you in a negative way because they see you biking to work, like, what, you don't have a car? No, to normalize biking transportation.
I love that, Bertie. Angelo.
I have a few friends that are administrators in schools. And so I've been trying to come up with a plan to try to start kids seeing bikes for recess. All right, because not every kid can get a bike at home, but if they can get on the bike at recess, how does that look? How does that change their outlook on cycling overall? We spend money on the things that we want to spend money on, right? So if you really want to get into cycling, maybe you don't buy those $200 pair of Jordans. Maybe you sacrifice that money and you go get a nice helmet, right? So it's little things like that where I really think for the culture, we need to break some habits, right? Because we see things where it's nah, because I get it all the time. Man, you did what? You spent what on what? I haven't bought myself a regular pair of shoes in probably since I've been riding bikes. Because it goes to my helmets or some knee pads or something like that. So I think that's probably another conversation to have. But
thanks, Angelo. Devin.
A big piece of this is learning what people need, right? So if you were someone who is a bike mechanic, right? Learning about your situation, you're I'm doing this ride, this is my first time, right? So someone making a set of suggestions, right, for you so that you can choose what you would like to do instead of feeling, and I don't know how you felt, but making that happen. I think if you're someone who's leading rides, what are ways you can kind of break down the language around the type of ride it is for folks who are newer to riding, right? And I think even the term beginner is overused because the definition of beginner looks different for many people, right? So beginner on gravel versus beginner on road is very different, right? So really thinking about how you break down language to describe different rides. I think when we're wanting folks to feel welcome and inclusive, when you're leading a ride, right? Do introductions, do icebreakers, feed people. People who are fed are happy, right? So just thinking about those little things, I think. And then my biggest thing I do in folks who are asking about biking, I'm what are you trying to do? What type of riding are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? And also, please encourage folks to get helmets and lights, right? So safety around riding. I think in COVID, we saw this big boom where folks were riding, and then there were all these accidents because people were I'm going to ride for the first time and do critical mass with 300 people. And it's ride safety is a big thing. And so I think, accessibility can be broken down in many forms, right? That's if you're a trail builder, how do you think about trail access for folks who are, differently abled, right? So I think there's so many layers to the access conversation. I think I always come back to the theme of listening and doing research, understanding, right? What community are you in? What situation are you in? What can you learn from the environment before you start making recommendations and are, seeking to make things more accessible, right? So asking those right questions from the beginning, I think is really key.
And I like that, Devin, because it's a very much an approach of one, asking what people need before making the assumption of what they need and meeting with them where they're at. And I'm loving a lot of the things that you shared. I wrote them all down, break down the language. Last week we hosted a women's conference and we had a guest speaker. Her name's Aiko Bethia. She does a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion with Brene Brown. And she talked a lot about precision of words and how it's really, really important that we are understanding and aligning on what the definitions of things are. So when someone says they're a beginner, really unpacking what that means, that could be a really good tactic for anybody in a public land store, right? Okay, so tell me what a beginner means to you. Help me understand. Intermediate? Okay, what does that look like, right? So that we can really understand and meet people where they're at. I love this idea of feeding people. Woo! Feed them, they will come. I love it. And maybe that's even how we get people to just dip their toe into the water of cycling, right? We're really excited. We're hosting something here for Juneteenth Youth Fest that hopefully will help people cycle more, and specifically youth. And hopefully we'll be able to engage them with some things called s'mores, things like s'mores, because we plan to have some s'mores there. And then I love this idea of removing assumptions. And I think bike safety is really interesting too. And I say this because I know how complicated it can be depending on where you're riding, right? And I guess my question for anybody in this chat of just when you're thinking of bike safety, I know that we can go to our public land store, we can ask questions and have an expert. Are there other places that are really good resources for bike safety? And I say that because, you can Google something, but you don't know what's going to pop up sometimes. So I asked, like where, if you're just, again, never been on a bike, it's been a while, defining beginner here. Where could we go? Angelo, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure like a lot of like local cities have like local like group rides and stuff like that. When I first started riding, I rode with a group called WMR. It was all women's, and it was me and another guy, and they kind of like showed me the ropes of like how to ride a bike. They showed me like changing the tube on a bike, and so group rides. I know sometimes group rides can be like a little overwhelming, but like small group rides where like you have they're real intimate, where like you can actually have a conversation and like you're not just trying to chase the person in front of you, and you can actually get taught some things like while you ride. Local bike shops, it depends. So you got some bike shops that's kind of like all they want is the money. And then you got some bike shops that's like this, what we call like real local homey bike shops, where you can just go in there, they got a couch, you can just hang out in there, you can talk to the mechanic, and they really look out for like the rider. I would say those are the two things that work for me.
Thank you. I see Devin, and then we'll go to Talib.
I would just put a plug for your local bike advocacy groups, because what's going to happen is I believe that those groups are going to be versed for the laws in your area, because it's not just for me, and I probably go a little bit too hard in the paint on this, but acknowledging that there are road safety as far as like hand signals and calling things out, right, for cars, but then there is a layer of like, if something does happen and you do get hit, being versed on the laws in terms of what your rights are, right? So those are two, I think, very important distinct areas. And for me, I think like Bike PGH probably has some materials, our local bike advocacy does here. And I think a lot of local bike groups are actually moving to become multimodal. And so you may see some of the language around like just safety for, pedestrians, cars, and cyclists. So just even kind of versing yourself on like, the 5 to 6 standard, hand signals and that kind of thing. And I think group riding is even a whole layer of kind of safety and kind of, calling things out, how you communicate with other cyclists and cars and that kind of thing. So one time for the advocacy groups there.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. Talib.
Yeah, I would agree both with Angelo and Devin quite a bit. The local advocacy organizations will kind of know in each specific city or region kind of what, some of the best practices are. And, cycling accessories are what keep us safe. Bike lights, helmets, even bike locks, keep our gear safe. So those are always things that should be considered as, hey, if you're buying a bike, make sure to think about these lights. We even have, lights come in every level of affordability. So that's something that, even if someone's just browsing through, it's always important to say, hey, we want to keep you safe, because especially riding at night on the streets, the lights are just so important. So that's something that, it only took me one close call of not having lights to be like, I have 2 sets of lights charged all the time, every day, even if I'm not riding. So
thank you. I love this safety first. We do actually have a question from an audience member who's really curious about the right type of bike if you are a beginner versus an expert. So any thoughts on I'll go to everybody raise their hand. Not everybody can see this, but I'll go to Shequaya and yeah, we'll start there.
So I would definitely say know what kind of riding you're wanting to do first, and start with start there, and then start with a cheaper model. I always say definitely don't worry about trying to spend a bunch of money. start on something super cheap and just ride. Start wherever you are and enjoy that, because as you ride, you'll learn and grow through that process, and then you can just spend more money later in that regard. And anytime you're in a group on a ride or at a shop and they're making fun of your equipment, you're at the wrong place. It's time to pivot and go somewhere else. So yeah.
Okay. You ain't there. No lies. What you just said, Shequaya. No lies. All right. I love this. So know what you want to do, which I think throughout this conversation, I'm not gonna lie, I got a little bit lost every now and then because I was realizing how many types of biking or cycling there are. So can anybody like run down the list of all the possibilities? They're like, it could be endless. We'd be here for days. Is there anybody who could, yeah, Devin, go ahead, who could help us maybe contextualize that really quickly?
So I would say like just a general like categories. I would say road, there's road and off-road, right? But within that it's road, I think commuter, I would say mountain biking, and then perhaps like off-road gravel would be kind of the focus areas, I would say, because commuting, streets in Atlanta are shit. So I have a pretty I ride my gravel bike in the city because, those road tires are too thin, right? So it just depends on where you're at. But I'd say those 4 areas. I know, Angelo, looked like you were going to say something, but I would say those are kind of the areas I would cover. Obviously, I think e-bikes are a piece there, and they're making e-bikes that are all forms of those bikes too, right? So they have like e-bikes that are mountain, e-bikes that are commuter, so that kind of thing. And then when you think about commuter, that's also kind of hybrid, right? So a bike that can do road and trail, right? So having a bike that can meet all of those needs. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Devin. Angelo.
I'm gravity oriented, so it's kind of like, I know a couple of times I was kind of like caught off guard because I always sometimes forget that you got road, you got cross country, you got gravel, you got trail riding, you got downhill enduro. So those are kind of like the disciplines that those are the terms that I use. So as far as bikes go, I'm looking for like mountain bikes or cross country bikes or cross bikes or a downhill bike or something like that, which is a little bit towards the extreme part of this sport,
Thank you. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for helping us understand how we can make the outdoors, specifically with cycling, more accessible for folks. Thanks for giving us some advice as folks who are helping people shop for cycling gear all the time. Yeah, thanks for a great dialogue.